لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The topic of this presentation today is protecting our children against drugs. And I stand before you not as a physician, not as a experienced parent, not as someone who's even particularly qualified to talk about drugs specifically. I feel that my qualification to talk to you today is only because Southern Majlis asked me to do so. And I do happen to, however, be a physician. I do happen to be a father of 5 children, and I did read on all the material that our Quran, Holy Prophet ﷺ, and all our resources have shed light on this matter and looked at it in depth. So I wish to share that with you today. And I think this is the preventing. Yeah. So this is the actual. I said another PowerPoint. That's fine. I can be free from that. Assalamu alaikum. I don't have to stick with the slides. I'm more interested in staying engaged with you. And if at times you need to, you want to raise your hand and add a comment or correct me, you are welcome to do so. But if you do have the updated slides, it would be nice. So I sent it. Okay, it was the finance Secretary of Finance of Cleveland. Anyway. I'll leave it to the local organizers. If they can sort that out, it'd be really helpful, because I made some significant changes. So anyway, so most importantly, the Holy Quran, obviously. So this conversation really should be about how to equip you as parents to be able to anticipate what your children are going through and how to react in situations, how to prevent them from happening in the first place. And I will touch on our resources, but we also have to ask how can we practically apply what we've learned from the Quran and the Holy Prophet ﷺ's advice into 2019 parenting. So the Holy Quran obviously says, as you all know, that with regard to wine and games of hazard or gambling, that there is a great sin in both, and there are some advantages for men, but the sin is greater than their advantage. And often, sometimes, the youth will say, well, they'll rationalize. We'll all rationalize. It's not a youth thing particularly, that when you want to do something that you know you can't do, you try and find a way to justify it. That's what a rationalization is. So the word used for intoxication is khamr, but it's translated usually as wine. And so sometimes youth, or some Muslims in general, they'll try to say that marijuana is exempt from this verse. It's not covered. But Khalifa Rabi explained that khamr actually means intoxication. It doesn't mean wine. It doesn't only mean wine. It's a broad word that also under which marijuana and all types of intoxicants are covered. So that's very important. So the thing about parenting is that having grown in a country no longer matters. It doesn't necessarily prepare you to the challenges that children are facing today, because we are all like digital immigrants. We don't necessarily, life has changed so rapidly and it's moving so quickly that we're outpaced by technology. And shaitan is so tricky. What cigarettes were in the 80s and 70s, we kind of waged a war as a society on cigarettes. And we did it with education, and we talked about how repulsive it is, and we educated our youth, and we weaned our youth and our culture to an extent off of cigarettes, and where at least there's a really strong taboo when it comes to cigarettes. But Shaitan was clever, and he says, okay, maybe I can think of something that I can create that can make them think that it treats cigarettes, but it's actually a cigarette in a new form. And that's what we're dealing with now. And that's with all of these vaping devices that are taking our youth by storm. And their intention initially, the way they had initially said, that this is intended to help you, people who are already addicted to cigarettes, get off of cigarette smoking. But if you look at their campaigns, their marketing is targeting our children. They use all sorts of, I mean, it looks like an electronic, it is an electronic device. This, let me show you the next picture. So it's a vaporizing device. This is what it looks like. This is an electronic cigarette or e-cigarette. Juul is a brand. So Juul is to electronic cigarettes what Coca-Cola is to soda. But it's the one that has the largest market share. And they have all sorts of designs. They're very accessible. You can buy them at gas stations. Youth buy them at school. They're sold at school. They're about $45 a piece, so $40 to $80, depending on what kind you get. There's a cartridge that goes in them. It actually is a USB. Well, it's not a USB, but you charge it just like you charge a USB. And you put in a cartridge which has oil. And the oil is vaporized. There's no, what is it called, lighter. There's no match. There's no button. You simply inhale, and that triggers the device to vaporize. And so what youth will do, and I encourage you to be really aware of this, because this is the number one thing that this talk will be about. And I'll talk about everything, but this is the most prevalent among youth, including our own youth. And it's being spread by youth to youth, even AMD to AMD youth. So it's being done at schools. People will, it's really easy. You can blow the smoke into your shirt. You can take a hit underneath the table, the desk, and it's really easy to conceal. There's no smell. It doesn't smell. And you can put THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, into the oil. And this can be sold too, and it is being used really easily. So it's made the accessibility of marijuana just rise really, really sharply. And this has been going on for a few years, but we're behind this problem. And just now, like the CDC and even the president, Trump made a comment a couple weeks about how this is like a national crisis. Time magazine cover. So parents are out of their wits. Now the thing is that it's marketed as something safer than cigarette smoking, and in itself it is, okay? But the idea that it is somehow a healthy product is a total lie. So it was intended to wean people off of cigarette smoking. And for anyone who is using this to wean yourself off cigarette smoking, more power to you, and we wish you success. But for every one person that is using it for that purpose, there are 80 children that have now used this device that were never smoking before. That's ridiculous. That ratio is astounding. And I would say a majority, I have the statistics, have tried it, and I think about 30% use it on a fairly regular basis in high school. These are teenagers. I'm not talking about people in college or some, advanced stage of life. This is people who come home and have dinner with you every night. Gee.
I can hold this question to later.
Sure, no, that's okay. Go ahead. Microphone right here. And
briefly, you started off with Holy Quran about Khamr. And just to be clear, and then you moved into Juuls. Is this an intoxicant in the same way as other intoxicants? And that doesn't necessarily take away any of its negative points.
I understand. Great, Jazakallah, great question. It is not an intoxicant in the same way that marijuana is or that alcohol is. However, Khalifa Sani did say that nicotine is a kind of intoxicant. It's not at the same level as alcohol or some of the other intoxicants, but you can't say, I mean, it is a psychoactive drug. And it has nicotine. So these products use nicotine. So the whole intention was to get our society off of nicotine, or at least they say their stated intention.
So just one clarification, I think, would you like to explain what intoxicant means? You know, it's the addiction or dependence. This, I think, we'd like to know the extent of that.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So intoxication, it comes in various forms, and there's different kinds, and different drugs, legal and illegal, can cause intoxication. The different degrees of intoxication. Some will totally incapacitate you to where you don't even have any memory and you're completely out of control, or you're even sedated to the point to where you may have trouble breathing. And then there's milder degrees of intoxication where you lose your inhibition, you behave differently, but you have some like motor incapacity, like you cannot say drive or do anything that requires much skill. And just for relaxation, so there's a whole spectrum when it comes to intoxication, but it's anything that subdues the mind, that dulls your wits, and makes you unable to skillfully perform what you would normally do, and it can it alters your mood. So to answer the question, it is not exactly an intoxicant, but it can quickly become one if you add THC, which many people are doing. And the crucial thing is to realize that this is an incredible gateway into so many other types of intoxicants. And it's more important for us to be very, very conscious and put strong taboos on small things. This is why we don't shake hands in Islam, because if you put a strong taboo on something small, well, what does that say about the big thing? How strong of a taboo should that place on that activity? So similarly, if we are guardians of small mishaps, then we're doing ourselves a big service. And my parents, dear parents, talk to your kids about this early, before they see it. Someone else is going to talk to them otherwise. I can be heard okay, right? In the back of the room, Usman Bhai? Okay. So this is being done in secret, and there are a lot of meetings happening in student bodies around the school, around the country, about how we can prevent this from, how can we control this? It's already gotten out of hand, but they put out signs, and students will go to the bathroom and do it. Anyway, so let's just keep moving on. Let me see if I missed anything. A few notes here. Okay, yeah, so that's basically... So the other thing about this is that they'll use flavors, and the flavors are, it's not tobacco flavor, which is, if you're a cigarette smoker and you're used to tobacco, the flavors are like cherry, cotton candy. One of my favorites was Captain Crunch. It was ridiculous. They're doing this to target children, basically, and bubblegum flavor. So kids will love that. Oh, okay, it makes it really inviting and easy. And there's this whole false education about it being safe that has really invited a lot of people who wouldn't ordinarily do something to do something. Again, like I said, Shaitan is constantly evolving his tricks, and very shrewd. So this is just something that he's switching out and saying, hey, listen, let me trick them into getting them to do something and telling them that it's actually beneficial for them. Okay, so this is a depiction of, 30 days in any given month, 28% of teen vapers said that they had used an e-cigarette on at least 20 of the past 30 days. Okay, and it's a youth problem not so much a post-youth problem. This is just high school. Percentage of vapors, 28% of high school students are doing it, 3% of adults post-high school are doing it. Okay. Youth, they like to try new things, they like to experiment. In the absence of guidance, they fill that void with some of their own decisions. So one Juul pod delivers the same amount of nicotine as a pack of 20 cigarettes. Cigarettes are expensive too, but Juuls are, it's like another subscription. You know, you have to constantly buy cartridges to keep your habit going. And it's also something that you can do by yourself, and you can do in your bedroom. And like I said, there's no smell. And even the THC, the marijuana, it's not a very potent smell. I haven't smelled it with these cigarettes, but if you've ever smelled marijuana, it's an undeniable smell. You can't smoke it easily at home. But it can be done easily at home with one of these devices. So. All right, so New York Times. So New York Times calling it an epidemic. Yes, question, Brother Michael.
I would like to say something.
Oh, go ahead. Just.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Recently, they have started trying to ban them jewels. Have you heard about how they hurting them the teens? Well, in Dallas, about 2 or 3 teens been hospitalized about the jewels. It's very unhealthy. So.
Yes, I can speak to that. Thank you. It is, in fact, Walmart. I think this is just like a couple days old story. Walmart's like pulling them off their shelves now. So, you know, when things start, we as physicians, we don't really know how it's going to roll out in society, and we often make mistakes. And this is one of them. And we marketed something as professionals, or we didn't market it, but a private company, corporation did, but physicians got behind this too and said, hey, yeah, you know, this is a better alternative to smoking. And but what we didn't realize is that this oil can be very damaging to your lungs. And you inhale it, and it'll pack down and cause inflammation. And there's been a number of deaths now, at least like eight deaths. And these are just the reported deaths. And like over 550 cases of very serious, they call it mysterious lung disease. This is a picture of a chest x-ray, a normal chest x-ray. If you look at the upper part of the, so this is a chest. The upper part of the lungs, it's dark. The whole lungs should look like that. This is a patient who had a child, or I should say a teenager, who vaped and had this kind of mysterious illness. It's a pneumonia. And the tricky thing about this kind of pneumonia, it doesn't really respond well to antibiotics. So you do have an infection, but it's not the kind that responds well to antibiotics. So it's difficult to treat. These patients will have to be on oxygen. They'll have to have steroids for the inflammation. Sometimes they'll have to be on breathing tubes and machines until they can recover. So it's very, very serious. And so, okay, so just to change pace a little bit, that was about vaping. So before I get to this, let me just back up right quick. So what do you do if you find out that your child is vaping? And how do you find out in the first place? How do you prevent this?
Quick question, what's the legal age for these products?
I think it's 18 or so, 21? 21, right? Yeah, 21. But yeah, I mean, legal age is an easily cheatable system. As you know, you can get alcohol from Uber Eats. You can just order Uber Eats, and 50% of the time they'll know that this person's underage. They won't check the ID. They're supposed to check the ID. There's ways to cheat the system, and you buy from people who are underage. So there's some kind of bootlegging and black marketing going on. But good question, the age is supposed to be 21, and but that's not what's happening. As you can see, the majority of the users are teenagers. So, well, it's not.
Just wondering, so what are the symptoms if you're not aware of that?
Yeah.
Can you see a son or daughter or somebody, by
Yeah.
body language, by, eye color change, something?
Right. So flu-like symptoms, basically. Flu-like is what you'd expect to see in the flu is kind of what they tend to present with lung symptoms as well, coughing, so fevers, chills, body aches.
So you said one joule part is like 20 cigarettes. So how, 20 cigarettes takes, maybe 2-3 days. So how much time is used
Yeah.
to inhale one part?
It's a good question, but it's the kind of question I don't have an answer for. Sorry. Jazakallah. We have someone who can answer, actually. So I'm just kidding. I mean, so like it's just nicotine. The way that nicotine affects behavior is the same way that these devices will affect behavior. So it's a little bit harder to detect. You don't get the same type of effect. You can usually tell, or you have a feeling if someone is high, but you can't have that obviously when someone's smoked, and you can't smell it on the breath either. So that's another thing. It's hard. It's not in your clothes. It's very easy to conceal, and it's so it's a very attractive thing for youth to try to experiment with because there's this idea that it's safe, and it's really accessible, and that it's been marketed as such a kid-friendly thing. So it's really easy for them to want to try and experiment with it. And again, okay, if they did it, all right, it maybe not a big deal. And this gets me into the next part of the conversation. But how do you handle that? Like, yes, go ahead.
Question. So, like cigarettes, we've seen people being addicted and not being able to get off that addiction. So is Juul pretty much the same thing, or like once you're addicted?
Absolutely. It's the nicotine. It's the nicotine. Nicotine is a really hard addiction to break. The addiction cycle with nicotine is very, very stubborn and very, very tough. And it's not new. There's Khalifa Sani talked about how members of Jamaat, when he was, I think it's in Islam Nafs, he talks about this issue that members of Jamaat are addicted to this and they need to get off of this, basically. You need to leave this habit by your 30s and at the latest your 40s. But at the very least, if you're going to do it till your death, then you need to make sure that it dies with you and that you don't pass this habit on to your children. And this is only with regard to smoking hookah. So, and think about that for a moment. Because I mean, some of us have been to Pakistan. I know there's different cultures here in the room. And just hold the questions for a moment because I also want to speak. But the taboo when it came to smoking was really soft in the 70s and 80s, cigarettes. The taboo when it came to hookah was also, very soft actually, I would say, in Pakistan. Many of your elders, maybe some of you, had done it, or you saw it do as a part in your house. My point is, if your child has done something like this, there's no reason for you to freak out. And you have to understand the context. In your time, the juuling was hookah. Okay, the THC or whatever was the nicotine or whatever the nasha that was being put in the hookah. That was common back then. Okay, so that's what's happening now. And you need to apply the same benefit of whatever doubt you're giving yourself. Apply that to your children. And recognize that when it comes to mistakes in childhood, it's a reflection of our own weakness. The Holy Prophet ﷺ said that if a child does not offer prayers by age 10, what can you do? You can hit him. You can be very firm with that child. It's very important. But he also said something else. He said that salat becomes mandatory for children at age 7. And then what did he say to do? He said you have to remind them. From age 7 to 10, there is no hitting. There is reminding. That means reminding them 5 times a day, every day, 365 days a year, for 3 years, before you can finally say, okay, you know what? You're not getting it still. Let me give you a tap on the thigh or whatever it is to maybe knock some sense into you. And what kind of child is not going to respond after 4,000 or 5,000 reminders to do salat? He's just going to say, I'm going to do salat just so you won't bug me anymore. So my question is really like, are we doing those reminders when it comes to the tarbiyat of our children? And warning them about what's around the corner. They don't know, and you don't know either, but you have an idea, and you have a responsibility to be educated about it. So I hope that you would take that tenderly and realize that slow down with your parenting in the sense that you're reactionary parenting, and be more preventative, and try and anticipate more, have conversations. Dinner time, if you have a question, I can stop here. You go ahead.
No, I can come with some remarks.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, good. And there was someone else that I had asked to take us, yes.
I have 2 questions. The first question is that, is there any studies that those kids, they have any effects on their studies, like they miss classes? The first question. And the second is, those kids, they go into depression if they stop doing it?
Okay. So it's very habit forming, and it does interfere with routines, and it becomes a ritual. And I know the camera is rolling, but I'm just going to talk, and I'll let you guys sort out the editing later. But so I've had a lot of conversations with Ahmadi youth and children about this issue, and the problem is actually pretty bad. And I mean, I was surprised, and I try to keep my ear on the street. A lot of youth will do this before school, and if they don't do it, they're not comfortable. They don't feel at ease. It helps them relax. It's a morning ritual for them. And do it and then go to class. A lot of people will do it once they leave home. Then there's some place where they can hide, do it, and then go into class. Yes, it is habit forming. Yes, they're uncomfortable if they don't do it. It does make you easy, just like cigarette. Just think about anyone who doesn't get their cigarette. Works have to, professional environments have to incorporate like cigarette breaks, just so people can have peace of mind. And then there was another question about depression. So there is a relationship in general when it comes to using intoxicants and depression. So that's as much as I'll say about that. I don't know of any particular studies that look at juuling and depression, but there is an association or correlation with intoxicant use and mental illness.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Don't you think that if a father smokes in the house for the kids to see, don't you see that if a father smokes in the presence of his kids, and then the children growing up sees that the father is smoking, the child will be happy to see a friend who is also smoking, and he will take just a little bit of smoke. From there,
Right.
he knows my father smokes, so I'm also going to smoke. So by doing that, the child would try another step of going into this habit of vaping.
Yeah.
So why don't we call a spade a spade? That Khalifa Sani says this nicotine is not good. Why don't we be bold to tell our membership that nicotine is bad? It hurts our body. And you see Ahmadi Ansars coming to Ijtema and smoking. When I was in Ghana, somebody told me, a Pakistani man saw me, a missionary saw me in London and called his fellow missionaries and told them, look at this man. When they see you smoking, It's just like you've committed the worst sin on the earth. So why don't we be serious and tell our brethren, our Ansars, that smoking is bad and our children are going to copy? Why won't you, the Jamaat, be bold and bring this up? That's my suggestion.
Jazakallah. Very true. Children are great imitators. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that all children are born pure and innocent. And they're born believers in God, or inclined to. But it's us who make them a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim. And so that's our responsibility. With regard to smoking, I'll also add that now if someone's an addict, then there's a different attitude and approach to that person. And it's one almost, hospitality, in fact. One time a Turkish ambassador came to Qadian, and Hazrat Maulvi Abdul Karim Sialkoti Razila Ta'ala anhu was perplexed because he understood that this person's addicted. So, and we don't smoke in Qadian, so what are we going to do for him? He's going to miss his cigarettes. So he brought this up to Hazrat Muslim al-Islam, and he said that you should get him, go out of Qadian, buy him some cigarettes or hookah, and make that arrangement for him. So that was his gesture of hospitality, concern, care, regard for someone who had that habit. But at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ also said that smoking was not around during the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Now, smoking is not haram, but had it been around at the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he would have called it haram. But since I am just a ghulam, I'm not here to add or subtract from Sharia, I cannot call this haram, and I will not call it haram. But that was his statement on this issue. And he's Adal Hakam, he is the judge and the wise of this era. And think about this, the Holy Prophet ﷺ did say, don't approach the mosque if you have eaten garlic or if you've eaten onions. And the reason for that is because it emits a bad odor. So think about that. If you have to smoke at the mosque, what type of... That doesn't mean I don't sympathize, and we're not here to discourage anyone from coming to the mosque. You know, we probably have onions cooking on the grill today, I don't know. But we should remain conscious of these things. So. Wa alaikum assalam.
Just question, one question that just came to my mind. You mentioned about these Juul cigarettes having nicotine, and you mentioned something about they have now THC, that's a content from marijuana. Have you seen any other product or laced, these cigarettes have been laced with? Is there any
I'm not familiar, but I don't doubt it. I mean, it's, and that's part of the concern. Everyone's experimenting, they're trying.
Because what I see in the society, this is a platform where they are trying to create customers for these laced drugs. And just for the statistics, in 2017, with the fentanyl and overdose deaths that happened in this country alone, there was 72,000 deaths in this country. Those could have been prevented. And those were all because somebody was addicted for the drugs, and they somehow got these synthetic drugs, we call it fentanyl, and sometimes it's called fentanyl, sometimes it's a higher version. And I'm afraid if this trend continues, we're going to lose more of our kids in the coming years because they already have the platform to put this synthetic drugs in there.
Right. Jazakallah. So I'm going to keep it moving a little bit. Next is, so I downloaded a app. So everything happens on apps now. This particular app is called Weed Maps. So just like you have Google Maps or MapQuest or whatever Waze, there are apps where you can locate marijuana and score you some weed of various kinds of dispensaries, medical clinics, and even the recreational kind. Because DC is It's one of the 10 places, one of the 10 states, not a state, but 10 states that have legalized recreational marijuana. So recreational marijuana is coming. You know, the country to our north is doing it. There's countries to our south that have legalized it. So it's in 1/5 of our nation, 10, 50, yeah, 20%, sorry, 2/5, yeah, 20% of our nation's already done it. And some of the big states, right? California, for example. So, and a lot of the Democratic candidates are, some of them, are in favor of like federal legislation to legalize recreational marijuana. So this is coming. You have to be prepared to talk about this conversation with your kids because probably 95%, maybe 100% of the people that are out there right now, the youth, on social media are taking off all the taboos when it comes to marijuana right now. So, yeah. So, and then this needs to, so you have to have this conversation. Your child is going to say it's not that bad, okay? And you know what? He's wrong, but he's also right because it's not as bad as alcohol or the opioid crisis or some of the heroin, crack cocaine. And in some ways you can even argue that cigarette smoking is equally or in some ways worse than marijuana because of some of the other effects that nicotine has that THC doesn't cause. So although cigarettes may not be intoxicating the way THC is, but it has all sorts of effects on your cardiovascular system, on your pulmonary system. It can cause stroke, heart disease. I mean, it is a terrible drug, nicotine is, smoking. So THC has very limited, has some very limited medical benefits, but the medical benefits that it does have are real. So here's a question that you'll have to, you know, I'm tossing you one, and you have to decide how you're going to react because your child is, if they're not asking it, they're going to think it, and they're going to have this conversation. So how bad is marijuana after all? Because I'm telling you on social media, there's this huge push to make it acceptable, morally and socially acceptable. And if you lie to them and exaggerate, then they will not respect your opinion anymore because they will be able to arrive at that conclusion on their own. So be honest with them and talk about how that the intoxicants in small quantities, focus on what Islam teaches. Don't focus as much about how bad or dramatized or what type of scare tactics. That's important too, but it needs to be appropriately measured, okay? So marijuana is a gateway drug. The Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Allah Ta'ala said in the Holy Quran that no intoxication. So that's it, bottom line. Are you Muslim or are you not? Pick a side. Don't do it, it's not worth it. What are the benefits? What are the harms? Discuss. Yes, it does cause you to be demotivated. Okay, it leads to the weakening of nations. Khalifa Sani talked about this. He used the example of a war between China and Japan. China was, and it still is, the largest country in the world, more people than any other country. In Japan, very, very small country, and they fought a war, and Japan just obliterated them. And Hazur was saying it was because all of the soldiers were it was all because of nasha, this intoxication. They had these bad habits. They would take the different kinds of drugs. And there's this great nation with this great history and just undone like that. So it leads to the fall of nations. And I'm worried about this for the United States because we're heading towards that direction. We are legalizing everything. And there are like truths, falsehoods disguised as truths. Like prohibition is another one. Prohibition was actually a great thing. Yes, it did lead to underground crime and bootlegging and all of this kind of stuff. That's a separate problem. Those things were also there before, gangs, and they're also thereafter. But the medical benefits that society felt are never discussed. And there's a great New York Times article about this. You can look it up. The rates of alcohol liver cirrhosis related deaths, I mean, it went down. There was like, I think 8 years of prohibition in this country, or maybe it was about 10 years of prohibition in this country. Public drunkenness, domestic violence, homicides went down. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of, about 50% of less people were drinking during prohibition. So there's a lot of success, and that nation, a sober nation, can do great things. So here's my appeal to you as parents. Aren't we not a nation? These 20, 25,000 Ahmadis in this country, all of us, we are a nation. And if our children are intoxicated, then what strength do we have to reform others? We cannot reform ourselves. I mean, we have a war to fight. We are a small nation just like Japan, and we have a mighty opponent that we have to face. Our children need to be sober. They need to be very educated about this and prepared to take on, to solve the world's problems, not to contribute to them.
Speak loud now when you can repeat it. The argument on the flip side, especially when we're talking to youth, is the pain management aspect of it, right? So if we start talking and taking absolute positions, and knowing where, as a society, based on age being on a higher margin and growing, we have more elderly, new diseases coming around, and so on. How do we deal with that if we take an absolute position on the other side? Just being
very good question. Yeah, actually, Review of Religions asked Hazur this question. I'm so grateful that they did. So Hazur gave a beautiful answer, and since this is a talk, I won't read it out, but in the last part of it, Hazur says that, look, there are some benefits in cannabis, okay? And insofar as any of those benefits can help save a life, then it can be used. But my question is this, for your child or for our children, is that what ailment of yours is threatening your life? You have to think about something that's saving your life. I mean, even the flesh of swine is permissible for a Muslim if you're dying, right? So it's no longer haram. It's actually halal for you. You can have it to save your life. But if you're having pains and you're having moans and groans, then maybe you just deal. It's not like you don't have any alternatives. Why do you have to do something that Islam is outrightly forbidden? Just so that you don't have to just deal with it, walk it off, deal with the patients, and if it gets to that point, you can. There's the CBD there's no THC in CBD. If you really must, maybe try. There is some medicinal benefits for CBD for symptom control, pain control, and other things, sleep help, and but you have alternatives at your disposal. Now, patients, for example, cancer patients who are literally dying because of chemotherapy or there's just lack of nutrition, they can't eat, they have no appetite, and in that case, you might make an argument that it can at least lengthen their life if they have something that will, a potent appetite stimulant, which marijuana really is. Cancer patients, chemotherapy just cannot keep anything down, and they have terrible nausea. And you, Dr. Saab, you probably want to speak to this because
Assalamu alaikum. So, first of all, this is an uphill battle. Like every third patient I see coming to operating room is just smoking marijuana occasionally on a daily basis. Legalizing it and 10 states are making it worse. The discussion with your children is difficult. My question to you, Secretary Saab, is that we're a nation in this center. What resources do we have other than having a talk, which does not work, with our children, that from Jamaat's standpoint, that we can use or utilize to help our children to get out of this thing? And we all know very well this is almost becoming an endemic in our Jamaat. So we have to, as our brothers said very clearly, the call spade the spade. And we have to address that. I mean, the school talking with children does not work the law edge. They will think you're joking with them when they say nothing wrong with it. And you say, give them Islam, they're already off of track of having Islam if they're doing at least marijuana a day. The school takes off the doors from bathrooms of their school so the kids can't vape in it. I mean, this has happened like last week or so. That how bad and how subtle this thing is.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, as parents here, who some of us will be having the struggle right now, that what resources we have from Jummah's standpoint. Obviously, we have all the other things we should you can utilize to help.
Jazakallah. I asked the same question from Hazur when I was there a few years ago, and Hazur said that if someone is addicted, then they should get medical help. And if they can't afford it, then the Majlis should pay for it. And if the Majlis can't pay for it, then the Jamaat should pay for it. And once he's recovered and a good 6 months have passed and he's sober, then he can even resume his office if he had one. So, it's a beautiful message on both sides of Hazur's statement, on one hand and on the other hand. The other thing Hazur said is that you should reform their company. So surround them with other good youth who can bring them back. And he added a word of caution that make sure you choose the right youth to go with them, because what can happen is those youth can be affected and influenced by that person as well. And so he added that grain of salt as a caution. So these are two things that Hazur said with regard to this. Let me see if there's something else I can remember. And then also, I think talking to them early too, like earlier, I sense that sometimes the conversations are already had, but and they're already persuaded. They may already have been into a pattern of behavior by the time that their biyat from the parents kicks in. I don't know, but I sense that. So it's a lot better to talk to. Preparing for this speech was great for me as a parent of 5 kids. They didn't know what vaping was, but I made sure I let them know what it was. I beat them to it. My eldest is 14, and then my next is 12. And so, but now they know what it is, so when they encounter it, they're prepared. As opposed to, have you seen this? Yes, I have. What do you think? I'm already late. So telling them, hey, there's dangers, be aware, don't do it. You can be persuasive.
I have a question right here because I have kids going to living middle school and living high school, and in the same situation. I was very much worried in the last MK meeting. Someone told that even in our Jamaat, the numbers are 85% something which have at least tried something which is not permitted, and especially drugs. So I was thinking, what are the, as you are Qaid for a long time, you might be having this type of circumstances when a kid grown as an MD kid, very much well care, and then he suddenly goes toward that. What are the early signs and symptoms as a parent we should be worried about if we see those? I know some from different sources, but if as a MD Qaid experience, what are your that?
This is tricky because sometimes, so isolation is a big one, but sometimes we confuse, because children are going through hormonal stages too, and we confuse isolation with rejection or maybe drug use when it's not necessarily. It's just they're going through hormonal changes. They're confused about themselves. So you can't ask them, they don't make sense because they don't know. The walls go up, how was school? Good. What did you do? Things. They don't know. That's the universal experience. I mean, a lot of you are probably facing that. And but look at their friends and see if their friends are changing. And if their friends are changing and what are their friends like, then you can maybe suspect that, hey, I need to keep a closer eye. And I'm just going to go ahead and skip to a slide right here. So This is the neighborhood I grew up in from like 1983, I think, to 2005 or something. And that red dot is our home. And the end of this arrow is a basketball court. And I used to play basketball there. And I would sometimes ride my bike and take my ball, or sometimes I would just hop in the car and go. So it was like about a mile away, and I would shoot hoops. But I would notice something, which is a bit strange, but it was okay, whatever. Abu's car would sometimes pass by there. So I would tell Abu that I'm going to play basketball, shoot some hoops. And then like 20, 30 minutes later, an hour later, Abu's just driving. It's like, that's Abu's car. What is he? There's no out from that side of there's no reason for him to, you can't leave the neighborhood from that side. It's only from that other side. So he was just checking up on me. He just wanted to make sure I was, he said he was going to the basketball court. Did he go to the basketball court? What is he doing at the basketball court? Who is he with? Is he actually shooting hoops? What's going on? Does he, So, and I didn't feel like there was a betrayal of trust. It was fine. It was just like, that's cute. Okay, so boo. And it's not like I was a problem child. I wasn't perfect, but there was no reason for Abu to be really scared. But he was just doing that because that's what a parent does. And he would let me. He didn't say, don't go. Or, if I was going to come home late, he wouldn't stop me, but I knew that he wouldn't go to bed until I came home. And he never said that. I just knew that. So that was like a sword hanging above my head. I knew that I had to get home because Abu's not going to sleep until I get home. So I better go home. And so I would do that. So
We are discussing all the things which is worldly techniques and everything, but we are missing one thing. Because if you decide to see your kids, taking care of them, keeping watch them, you must pray for them. Because if the parents are praying for the kids, they can't be spoiled. Once President Muslim said to find some weakness in anyone, must pray 40 days before counseling that person. If you pray and then look for the result, I think you will never.
Absolutely right. The prayer is the most important thing. I mean, you could almost do nothing. Well, I shouldn't say that, but prayer is something so powerful that even it's the only thing you can do with someone who's at that dark stage of addiction, and you've tried all these, or you reacted late, or whatever it was. I mean, it's been a struggle even for prophets. Even prophets had known this experience. Hazrat Ibrahim, alayhi salam, although he had two beautiful children, he was very, not terrified, I shouldn't say it, but apprehensive about the tarbiyat of his children. He was constantly, and that was the real sacrifice of Hazrat Ibrahim. We do a qurbani on Eid, but that is not just a recollection and commemoration of the dream. It was a commemoration of the sacrifice that Hazrat Ibrahim, that the parent did to do the tarbiyat of the child, so by the time he is baligh, age 12 or however he was at that age, that when he asked the question, that he knew that he would be able to say yes. That's the real sacrifice. This is Khalifa Sani's tafsir of this whole concept. One of there's several meanings, but that's one of them. So dua is, ultimately it's just Allah's fazl. You have responsibility, but you don't have control. Allah Ta'ala has control. And you could be it's not a reflection necessarily, or even at all, of your weakness. It's just Allah Ta'ala just decided to give you a trial. He's given Nabis that trial before too. And also the other thing I'll add is it takes two parents to do the tarbiyat of a child. It's not just a father. And in some of the cases of the prophets, Khalifa Rabi was explaining that the mother may not have been perfect. And so it's a combination of two parents' efforts.
Assalamu alaikum. Wanted to get your thoughts regarding localization of this subject in Jamaat chapters. Do you think that this subject would be something best taken up by, for example, Thayer Academy and systematically taught every year, so that very young age they get like medical information and they know how to like react when someone offers them to go smoke marijuana in school or vaping and the harm of that? Do you think it should be an auxiliary program? Do you think it should be a special program? And what are we doing? Should we try to deploy so that chapters are uniform in their advice regarding medical impacts and also social situations? We do a lot of training, and I think that we try to bring content that's therapeutic oriented. This is like a life lesson that can save children if we do it at the right age and do it often enough. It's not like a one-off topic that we do in 2019. It should be done like every single year, and it should be very systematic. So what are your thoughts about how we can localize this content?
Good. So it's an administrative question, and I think that all of those things make sense. We should do them all. But I'm going to share this slide related to your question. Let's see if I can find it, if it's in this one. I didn't get captured. So I don't know if my old slide, so I had a slide, I had pie graphs. So just picture this, okay? You have a pie graph, okay? 95 is one color, 5% is another color. So hold that thought. Now, what I did was I took the number of hours in a week, it's like 140 something or whatever the number is, and took out 8 hours a day for sleep, okay, for your child. So whatever that leaves is 16 hours a day. You do the math times 7 days, okay, and then you take out, say, 2 hours for the Higher Academy, an hour for, let's say there's a Jamaat general meeting, that's 3 hours. Let's say you went to Jummah that day, you were really good, or that week, okay? And then you even took your child to slot centers. That's 5, well, for one of the nights. So that's 5 hours in a week that you had under the umbrella of Jamaat. So 5 hours, you do the math, it comes out to be only 5% of the hours that the Jamaat gets with your child. 95% of the rest of the time is with you and with their friends. And which is, you know, we're basically responsible for you're responsible for your children's friends and who they're with and where they're at when they're in school and after school and all on the weekends. So that control is yours. And I dealt with this a lot, and I'm not getting this at all from this room, which is great, but Khuddam Lamde needs to do this. You know, the Jamaat didn't do this, you know, failed my child, you know, all this kind of stuff. But the reality was, those are excuses. Because Jamaat didn't fail your child, really. We can always do better as a Jamaat, and we should. And we may never be perfect. But there's some truth to this. Because your child is with you, except for 5 hours out of the week. So where's, maybe I should be asking you that question, you know. Anyway, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Actually, I think you have covered pretty much everything in detail. But again, to recap, I think, what do you think is the role of relationship with your child, number one? And number two, physical activities and involving children and khuddam in general in physical activities. As I remember, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Salis, he emphasized to a great deal. As a matter of fact, if I am not wrong, there used to be a rowing, kind of team in Rabwa. So how do you see that in eliminating or, these type of tendencies?
Exactly. I think there was some rowing going on in Houston earlier this week. We had a pretty massive flood. But you're right, yeah, we should have, mashallah, Khuddam Lamde does a decent job with organizing local sports. Not everybody goes, and sometimes it helps, and then sometimes sports doesn't necessarily solve the problem either. It builds brotherhood. But what you said earlier about having the relationship with your child, I sense that a lot of patients do not have friendships with their children. Just because you're a friend with your child does not mean they're going to lose your respect. Okay, they can still be, you can still have that dynamic of father-son and still be their friend. Okay, and if you don't have that, then I think you're really, really, against the odds here. So 4 out of 5 kids will have tried drugs by the time they have tried drugs of any kind, alcohol or marijuana, by the time they're graduated from high school. that's an astonishing number. And those are the odds that your kids are against. Like, you want to play those odds? That's what's going to happen if you don't have that type of tarbiyat going on. So, Jazakallah. No, real quick question though about how do you do that? So let me just spell it out. So how about just sitting down, talking to them, and even if they're not talking back, it doesn't matter. I've noticed this with some of the kids that I feel like I've kind of gotten behind on emotionally connecting with. It makes a difference. If you just bring your wall down, doesn't matter if you're goofy, silly, start talking to them about your day, about things that happened. Hey, listen, let me tell you a bedtime story. Just make something up on the fly. It doesn't even have to end well. Just whatever. You're connecting with your child. They know you're trying. And then what I noticed was that then slowly my child would begin to talk to me more and reveal things. And whenever they would speak, there would be more energy in their speech. Something was happening. You can do that and find your own way. Stay creative, bike riding, playing ball, tickling, piggyback rides, all of these things. And don't stop it either. And keep a healthy environment at home. And then I'll end with this because there's a line, but you have to make sure that your child, you may not be smoking or doing drugs, but your child is filling a hole in their heart with something that they don't have. And you or we have to realize, what are we filling our hearts with? And because your children will do something similar. What I'm saying is that it's your children's behaviors and mistakes are a reflection of the mistakes and behaviors that we have. We just don't recognize it. We fill our lives with heavy cars, with high ceilings, and we give our best to work, and we come home and give our worst. And there's nothing left for us to give to our wives and to our children because we gave our best. When we come home, we're still. And that, that's not good. It's not healthy. And we've given our work and our, keeping up with the Joneses, our reputation, our professional excellence, our budgets and all of these things, the goal to have a better car, and we've put that in our heart where it doesn't belong, where Allah Ta'ala should belong, where the atmosphere of Ahmadiyyat in our home should belong. Meanwhile, our children don't have those types of things to fill the hole that they see us filling our heart with, so they reach for whatever they have. So you have to watch yourself, and your children will then learn from you.
Assalamu alaikum. In fact, I was listening with great interest to all the questions and all the deliberations. But an idea came to me. We are trying to do everything, our children, and you are doing it, and everybody, I suppose, is doing that. But the one thing is missing, which was my goal, and that is somehow create a pride in your child, that he should be proud of what he is, and he should be proud of who he is. He is an Ahmadi, and Ahmadis don't do that. And he is son of a such and such person who has been Ahmadi, born Ahmadi, and he is not doing that. He is son or daughter of such and such grandparents who were Ahmadi. They were proud of being Ahmadi, and they were not doing these things. And these things are not done by the proud Ahmadis. And any Ahmadi should be proud of his being an Ahmadi. If we can somehow create that, because there are nations who have created that pride in their children, and they have conquered the world.
Yes.
They've conquered the nations. So you have to create a pride in your children of being the children of Ahmadis. If you can do that, focus on that, everything will be shining. This is my belief.
Very good. And that can happen through education and telling
Talk
them the
to
stories.
I just talk to them that they are Ahmadis, and Ahmadis don't do that. They can ask you many questions, then be prepared to answer them, but answer them honestly.
Right. Jazakallah. And as Dr. Saab is coming, I'll just mention one quick point. It's, it may serve you well to put a picture of the Prophet ﷺ in your home. Like, nice size, nice frame. It reminds your children who they are.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to mention a couple of things. One, we just...
3 minutes? Okay. No, 5 minutes, just 3 comments. Okay, we'll stop the comments here so that I could get through the rest of the presentation. I mean, after these 3, sorry.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I apologize.
So we did have a spiritual fitness camp which has it part of the syllabus, which has to be conducted in every Jamaat from the Tarbiyat department. So they are addressing the issue. I just want to mention that one thing. The second thing is I just look at the law, like Virginia law. So in this case, law is on our side. So I'm not sure. I was just wondering if we, in addition to moral training, if we let our youth know that it's really illegal and they have to pay the penalty for that, how would they react to it? Sometimes they listen more to the law than to the parents.
It doesn't hurt, but remember that if it's legalized, it doesn't, like if tomorrow, for some reason, Virginia changes, your argument's not gonna, you need to teach them the Islamic, give them the principles, but you're right, it doesn't hurt to let them know that, listen, by the way, if you get caught with it, you're gonna end up having this on your record and things like that. Jazakallah. By the way, I also asked Hazur about, it's legalizing the same concern. Hazur said that in Holland it had been done for a while, and their khuddam are just fine. So if you inoculate them with education and teaching and tarbiyat and everything, they'll be okay. Even if the country legalizes, you should be fine, provided you teach them.
Assalamu alaikum. So what I noticed, my son is in elementary school. Then it comes like the way schools are divided. Everyone knows elementary, middle school, and high school. We are talking about drugs in high school and all that stuff. But in the grassroots level, what I noticed, he started listening to the rap. So we talked to local murabbi and this, and as long as the rap is clean, you can listen in front of the parents, you're fine. So I was talking to him and driving one day and asking him, okay, so what do you like about this? I just put it on the radio. He said, don't listen to this music. I said, why? What's wrong with this? I didn't hear any bad words or anything. He said, no, they're talking about drugs. This is all about drugs. He already knew it. I mean, I was driving and I got a shock that, he was 9-year-old at that time, that how the society is slow poisoning kids through music. And within Jamaat-e-Ahmadiyya, within our community, when we had a National Ijtema in the same mosque, a lot of kids, other than going to extreme, just to take music, was a norm, easy rap, everyone is listening. And some kids are giving explanation, we are close to God through rap or whatever. That's how I am noticing, alhamdulillah, my son is fine, but I'm saying like, it's getting into his mind.
Right.
Drug will become a norm.
Indeed.
So I don't know if you want to talk about
just
music
a tip on that related to this is if it may serve you well to look who your children are following on social media. Actually, your children really shouldn't have phones, but if they have phones, they shouldn't be on social media for sure. But if they're old enough or they're responsible enough, you think, and eventually it's inevitable they may get on social media. But if they've reached that point, then you want to see who they're following, because that'll give you an idea of what's in their mind and where their temptations are. Because social media is also promoting a lot of these things: smoking, drinking, womanizing. I mean, and the type of accounts that our children follow, I've had to tell people, you need to stop following this person or this lady. She doesn't post the kind of pictures that behooves you to follow. And but the celebrities that are doing all this stuff, they're doing these drugs, and they have all of everything one could imagine in life, but they end up being empty and hollow inside, and end up killing themselves, all because of the drug addictions. Every month we hear about some celebrity who dead end. They had everything: women, money, fame, and suicide. Yeah. And whereas you have someone who's a beggar, who is fighting to stay alive because even though he has nothing, but another person has nothing and just wants to die. Couldn't want anything more but to be that. It's very sad. you can talk to your kids about these kinds of things, whether you could have a seat as you're coming up, that like using the internet to educate them is great. They might know some of these people that have, I think a lot of the, what is it, not Nickelodeon, Disney stars and stuff or whatever, they go through these, they get into drugs, they start messing with their, mind, they'll start cutting, they'll just, they'll get into rehab, and they'll be like 18 years old, 19 years old. It's really, really sad. Pop stars, young pop stars. So using the internet and people that your children are familiar with to help educate them. So,
Assalamu alaikum. The main theme over here is to have a conversation with our children. But I think in order to have a conversation, if you don't know the facts yourself, you will be very hesitant even to bring up the conversation. Correct. Because the kids will know more than you. So as a person, you're just shying away as a parent. Oh, let me not get into that trap. But we are hearing that what platforms has Jamaat made this and that. I mean, nowadays it's so easy. Just take out your phone, look it up, look what marijuana does, and go to the right sites. If you allow me, one of the sites is you can go to CDC websites, cdc.gov, I think, or org, .gov, and you have information about vaping and marijuana over there. Those are the facts. There are tons of other websites which have sort of made up facts. Don't distract yourself from that, but get your information first and then talk about the facts that you have, not just anecdotal stories or something like that.
My 5-minute limit expired 1 minute ago, so if you could kindly be brief.
I just want to make a small comment that the conversation we have heard, mostly I think we were referring to father and maybe not explicitly like son, but I think that includes daughters also.
Absolutely.
So that I wanted to emphasize that the daughters are also included in this, and they can doing the same thing. And also,
I mean, I'll just add, it's almost 50-50.
Exactly.
It really is 50-50.
Right.
Man, I wish you could hear some of the conversations I've had with your children, and they'll tell you, they know what the other Jamaat girls are doing. And they'll just tell me like, hey man, I'm telling you, it is 50-50.
I tell you, in like in 80s and 90s, obviously vaping was not there. But when I talked afterwards, I wish I was friend with my son and daughter at that time, which I am right now friends with them, which is a little late. But now they tell me when I ask them, do you think at that time when you were there drugs? Dad, yes, you don't know. But people were doing it. So there are a lot of pressure in that sense, and I think you are absolutely right. Friendship is as important as other things are doing that. And daughters need to be exactly treated the same way as the sons.
Absolutely. Jazakallah, going to blow through this. Just remember, by the way, you should check don't be afraid to check your children's phones, their rooms, open their drawers, open their shoe boxes. It's okay. Like, like my father. If it gets to that point, it's kind of not that great. But I mean, if you need to save your child, then do it. If you need to save I don't know what Dr. Phil is saying, but like, yeah, I mean it's a reactionary move. You really shouldn't have to do that. If it's gotten that bad, you should not have to have gotten that. I mean, you have the right to do that. If you have to, you should.
I think the answer you're going to find yourself. I think.
Beautifully put.
So I think look into your heart and check it out.
But don't think you don't have the right. You are their parent and you are answerable to God. What's that?
You want to be able to trust your kids. You know what
sure,
do you call
but you also want to
person
save
who can
them.
Kill the conversation and kill the fun, right? That respected Nadeem Fadi Sahib is waiting for his turn. I think we'll have to do the program.
Right.
Sorry,
Excellent.
Bilal bhai.
Gotcha.
This is why we need
Jazakallah.
to-
Thank you.
रोशनी का सफर